Okay, here's part two because my headphones just died while I was talking. Um, I'm going to pick up with the end of the third question. I wanted to say lastly that art is what you make it. It's not always what is created by the creator. Um, Artistic merit is kind of up to you. It's the way that you interpret it. Sometimes art can be a reflection of you and your experiences and can exist outside of creator's intention. So instead of writing something off as lowbrow or highbrow, you should just witness it yourself and then come to your own conclusions. Okay, let's go on to number 4. This one's kind of gonna give a trigger warning just because I talk about something kind of personal, but I think it's like relevant, so it's fine. I'm okay talking about it. So I was gonna bring up when I was really young. I was probably 5 or 6. I was old enough to have my own room. I watched Evil Dead with my mom and my dad and my little brother, who was kind of a toddler. I think he was like asleep, so he wasn't really conscious of what we were doing. I remember I was expecting it to be like a spooky ghost story, kind of like other movies I've seen. Like we were really big into watching like supernatural movies, like Fright Night and different, I don't know, like 80s. If they're gory, they're kind of funny, and if they're scary, they're like atmospheric. So that's what I was expecting. But Evil Dead is kind of its own phenomena. It's the first time I ever saw something that was like objectively like really over the top, in a serious way, because it wasn't trying really to be super campy or anything. But so it's not about a ghost story. It's about demons and like pure evil. And that like really freaked me out, especially because I was my household was like moderately Christian. So that kind of like the idea of heaven and hell, I kind of believed in that. So now hearing that there's demons in the mix kind of shook me up a little. And so my dad was kind of like emotionally abusive, and I used to worry that like, what if he got possessed? Like, what if he hurt me? Like, what if his like weakness, his anger would allow for something like that to happen, and like Satan could prey on him. This connects right into, I also saw the Amityville Horror at a young age, and I realized like dads can hurt you. So those two movies together made me like freak out, and I was always worried that my dad would snap and kill me like it would in the TVs and like in the movies. Which he never did, but I was still worried about it, and I think it's a valid concern with any kind of like emotional abuse. That's why horror is so like interesting, because it touches on so many different sides. But specifically, I remember watching Evil Dead, and like Cheryl, when she turns, she's like the first person to turn, looking at the cards, and someone starts reading off the cards, and Cheryl like flies up, and her eyes are white, and she's all pale. That image like floated in my head for like 3 days. Like every time I went to bed, I like closed my eyes and I would see it, like her like up there, and then some of the other like demons like later on in the movie. So I had like 3 days of nightmares, but after that, I never felt that fear again from movies. Like I've never been actually like affected deeply by a film like that's like just because of like visceral reaction like to an image. Usually it's like ideas or concepts that disturb me, and I'll think about it for a while. But that's the first time I just looked at something and was like, that's scary. Which I also like love that, because I very quickly got into special effects, and being really interested in special effects, because you can create images like that are so viscerally reactive. So I think it's moving on, to part B of this is, I think it's okay to show horror films to children, but it depends on the child. I was always like a little bit more mature, probably because I was abused, so I was expected to be more mature. Like I would say start with like action films. Like my dad used to watch a lot of like karate movies and like Godzilla and stuff, so I kind of saw violence, but it wasn't like I didn't think about it too much. Because horror can have a lot of heavy topics, which I can see that like scaring someone off. I loved like trashy 80s films and gross out gore and the grime and the spurting and all that. And I think that as a kid I was paying more attention to that than I was like the political ramifications of the film that might have disturbed someone who's like more emotionally mature. And Werlin says how fantasy has its roots in other narrative forms, mythology and fairy tales, and the latter are usually teaching stories aimed at children to touch on issues of morality, conduct, and psychosexual conflicts. That's from Kindle Location 376, kind of summarized. But so these stories of like outrageous things are aimed at children all the time, and us as children, we kind of process them differently. Like, we don't see the subtext always. So I think that's kind of why kids can watch horror without being completely traumatized. Sometimes. I do think also that avoiding horror films as a child won't necessarily save you from any of like the visual trauma of seeing a horror film as an adult. Like, it's kind of exposure therapy. The more you see it, the more comfortable you are, the more you're like, oh, I know what that is, or that's just chocolate syrup, or, you can process what's happening in a way that's healthy because you've looked at it enough and you've kind of processed it and you're not as affected by it anymore. You could be an adult and watch a horror movie and still be freaked out. Just like, you can have your world shattered, your Judeo-Christian world, because you learn about demons. So I think that's totally normal. So yeah, I guess like I would probably show my kids some messed up movies, but I'd probably space it out and think about the themes and the ramifications of the morals. But that's your job as a parent. And lastly, number 5, I want to say that I agree with Aristotle, who said that he brings up the theory of catharsis and like release from seeing horrific or tragic events. And Aristotle implied that art, this is a quote, ought not to be subject to censorship because by experiencing vicariously a range of events and emotions in an artwork, especially fear and pity, a reader-viewer can be purged of the desire to act out of any such natural but dangerous tendencies in the real world. Tragedy is a purification, catharsis process to Aristotle. And I think that's a healthier way of processing and confronting problems than to just ignore them. Pluto's point is kind of like, just, you can't just avoid your problems forever, which I think it comes down to that. So I think it's better to confront your darkness and then process it and then maybe get better or think about a little bit deeper why you feel this way. And it's a lot healthier than just pretending everything's okay. In closing, I just wanted to give my last opinion on number 5. I think that's much better to process your feelings. In reality, bad things happen and people do bad things, and you can't erase that part of reality. It's there. And if you're ignoring it, if you pretend it doesn't happen, you're showing extreme privilege, and you may also be morally kind of bankrupt because you're letting people suffer when you can skate by in your life unfazed, which unfortunately people do that. But you can't defeat something you won't face. So that's the first step. If making a horror movie about a huge monster is the first way that you can start to like talk about like religious trauma, I think that's a good thing. And therefore I think because art reflects life and life is full of conflicts, it's totally normal to see violence and conflicts in art and films and plays in the sense of Aristotle. So thank you.